Uh, Good morning. Are you all able to hear me?
Virtual, yes, I can confirm.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Member Kama. Wasim, I'm just checking. Are you able to hear me in the chambers? We can't hear you.
Yes, Chair. All clear.
Perfect. A very warm welcome to all of you to this Standing Committee meeting on community safety. We are being joined both via the Microsoft Teams platform as well as in the chambers. My name is Gillian Bosman and I chair this committee. I'm now going to give over to members online to please introduce yourselves, and then I'm going to ask the members in the chambers to please introduce themselves.
Good morning, Chair and the department. My name is Mesuli Kama. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Colleagues in the chambers.
Gerrit Pretorius, member of the committee.
Deirdre Bartman, member of the committee.
Thank you very much, and a very warm welcome to Member Pretorius, who is the newest member of this committee. This is his first formal committee. He joined us while we were on the cluster visit. I see a member in blue has just walked in as well. Can I ask that that member introduces themselves as well?
Good morning, Chair. My name is Ayanda Barnes, member of the Standing Committee. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Welcome. I just need to note that we have received an apology from Member Christians, and we've also received an apology from the HOD Advocate Pillay. I'm now going to hand over to the team from the Ministry to please introduce themselves.
Good morning, Chairperson. Good morning, members and colleagues. I am joined by Director Amanda Dissel, and I am Regan Allen, but the team will introduce themselves.
Good morning, Minister. Good morning, Chairperson and members. I'm Amanda Dissel I'm the Director of Policy and Research from the Department of Community Safety, and I'm joined by my colleagues, several of my colleagues. They'll introduce themselves.
Good morning, colleagues. It's Teresia Hanekom. I'm the project manager for the PNPs. I'm working with Ms. Amanda Dissel in policy and research.
Good morning, Chairperson. Good morning, honorable members. My name is Peggy Similane, Monitoring and Evaluation, Department of Community Safety.
Good morning, Minister and Chairperson and members and colleagues. My name is Kangelane Khauza and I work in the Department of Community Safety, Policy and Research. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Kumbulani Mfanda. I'm from the Department of Community Safety, Policy and Research.
Morning, Chairperson. Morning, members. Marcelino Martin in the Ministry. Thank you.
Thank you very much, colleagues. I just want to check, are there any other members online that have not introduced themselves?
Chair, I also see Aisha, member Aisha Kasim.
I'm also seeing that member Kama, but maybe the member is still settling in. Member Kasim, are you with us?
Good morning and good morning to everyone else. Yes, I am joining virtually. Sorry, I do apologize. I got the notice that it's virtually, else I'd have been there as well with everyone else. I'm Aisha Kasim, by the way, representative from the EFF. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. We're a very dynamic group, so half of us are virtual and half of us are in the chambers. Members, we are also being supported today by our very capable procedural officer, Mr. Wasim Matthews, and Ms. Mary Ann Burgess, and they'll be taking care of all of the behind the scenes details. As you know, we are here today to discuss the Policing Needs and Priorities report in terms of Section 23.3 and Section 23 S4 of the Western Cape Community Safety Act. We are here to consider and to debate the Policing Needs and Priorities report. And we will also, at our next meeting, be giving the Provincial Police Commissioner an opportunity to respond to the report as well. So as you know, that section states that we need to give the Minister an opportunity to annually account for the functions in terms of the Act, and that we also need to give an opportunity for members of the Provincial Police Executive to respond to the PNP as submitted. The committee has received a written response from the City of Cape Town Safety and Security Directorate, so that would be their response. You would all have received it via email. But SAPS has asked us if they could present at the next meeting on the 7th of March, and details of that meeting will follow. So what I'm going to do now, members, I'm going to hand over to Minister Allen and the department to take us through the presentation, and then we will dive into the discussion.
Chairperson, allow me to once again say thank you for the opportunity for the department to present on the policing needs and priorities for the 2021-2022 financial year. If I am allowed to take colleagues back to March 2022, serving as the then chairperson of this particular committee, we had a briefing on the policing needs and priorities. We have seen consistently that as a department, we are submitting our policing needs and priorities. It is a constitutional mandate. It's a constitutional mandate that we would never negate on, because we are needing to submit our policing needs and priorities to the National Minister of Police so that it can be taken into account. This particular presentation will outline the constitutional and legislative mandate, the objectives, but also the key findings. But also, I wish to on the record state that the latest letter that I've sent during the month of January has not yet been replied to from National SAPS Department. That was first a letter from the 11th of the 1st, 2023, where we have submitted our policing needs and priorities to SAPS as well. And Chairperson, I am delighted that I am at this particular instance wanting to mention this key observation. As a committee, we debated our policing needs and priorities last year. And as a committee, we received a number of new recruits that would have entered the service. The committee will be reminded or will remember that that particular meeting echoed a figure of 720 new recruits to be recruited over the financial year. As the chairperson then, I wrote to National Parliament, to the National Minister, as well as General Patekile, and on 11/04 of 2022, we received a letter back that instead of the 720 members that we are getting, our policing needs and priorities were debated, and that figure was then increased to 1118. Even though at the time, we knew that we already had a 10% vacancy rate within our establishment. So it's up from 720 to 1118. And I will make comments later with regards to where those 1118 new members were deployed. But it is for the record that, yes, we have seen instances where the needs are tried. Government, national government will try to take our needs and priorities into account. But from where I'm sitting today, it has not been sufficient. But we will definitely take this presentation and field any questions. And Amanda Dissel will lead this particular presentation. But just for the record, we take our policing needs and priorities very seriously. Since my appointment, Chairperson, we have had district engagements across each and every district in our province, knowing that our policing needs and priorities also needs to be aligned to the annual reporting system and the annual planning systems for SAPS. And that is now going to take effect moving forward. And I think I'm very excited about that particular aspect because we are wanting to make sure that the needs and priorities are taken into account, and it's during a particular time when the annual planning cycle of SAPS is actually happening, so that we can be around the table. We want to strengthen the hand of the South African Police Service in the Western Cape. We want to strengthen the hand of the South African Police Service members in our rural areas that are severely under-resourced, that are crippled as a result of the lack of resources that they would have. So it's in that spirit that we will continue to engage the committee, and from there we will definitely, if there's any further questions and clarity seeking points, we will take it from there. But I just wanted the committee to be reminded that last year we debated the policing needs and priorities initially. We then take up a number of matters and we will give feedback on that. But this presentation will outline where we currently are in terms of our policing needs and priorities. I will now directly, Chairperson, with your permission, hand over to Director Dissel, who will lead the presentation.
Thank you, Minister. Who will be fighting the presentation? Okay. Thank you very much. I'm going to read from my computer. I can't see from there, if you don't mind. Okay, so as Minister said, this presentation, we give you a brief overview of the constitutional and legislative mandate, the objectives of the PNP research project, the process that we had followed in 2021-22, our key findings and recommendations. And then we want to look at after looking at the key recommendations, we've identified a number of roles for all the provincial role players, and we are going to talk to that briefly. And then finally, just give you an overview of the PNP process that we followed for this financial year, the 22-23 financial year. So the next slide, please. Just in terms of the policing needs and priorities derives its mandate from Section 206 of the Constitution, which requires that the Minister of Police must determine the national policing policy after consulting with provincial governments and taking into account the policing needs and priorities of the provinces as determined by the Member of Executive Council. The national policing policy may make provision for different policies in respect of different provinces after taking into account the PNPs of the provinces. The Community Safety Act, which in the Western Cape from 2013, requires that the MEC must report annually to the Provincial Parliament on his PNP findings. Our province is the only one which requires an annual PNP process. All of the other provinces do it more ad hoc, on an ad hoc basis. In terms of the Act, also the PNP report must be considered and debated by the Standing Committee, and the Provincial Commissioner and Municipal Police Service Head of Police Service must be given the opportunity to respond. The MEC must then formulate the recommendations on the policing needs and priorities, which is then forwarded to the Minister of Police, and the MEC must submit the approved policing needs and priorities to the National Minister to take into account when policing needs and priorities for the province are formulated. So there is no definition of what is a policing need and priority or how they should actually be determined in terms of the national legislation or the Community Safety Act. As I said, the Department of Community Safety determines this annually, and we have done this in different ways in the past few years. The next slide, this is our objectives in terms of the PNP research project for ourselves. And our objective is to influence the allocation, distribution and utilization of policing and safety resources in line with the identified policing needs and priorities and safety concerns. We want to determine the policing needs and priorities in order to increase safety in the Western Cape, as well as to make policy recommendations to decision makers. We also aim to publish an annual provincial policing needs and priorities report, and then we distribute it widely to a number of key role players, including the Standing Committee, the Cabinet, National Minister of Police, National Secretariat for Safety and Security, the National Commissioner of Police, Provincial Police Commissioners, SAPS District and Station Commissioners, the Metro Police, Law Enforcement, and all provincial cluster and local CPF chairpersons, neighbourhood watchers, and provincial government departments. So we distribute it very, very widely, as wide as possible. and then we also make it available on the province's website. So the PNP process for the 2020-21 and or 2021-22 year, what we did is we conducted a retrospective analysis of key PNP findings that had been made over a number of years since 2014-15 to 2019-20. Remember that we wrote this during the COVID lockdown period, and so it wasn't possible for us to hold actual engagements with the community. So what we did is we identified a number of key issues, and we identified those that had been identified on 3 or more occasions through the years. We also conducted desktop analysis to determine to what extent there had been any progress on the issues that had been identified. And we also consulted secondary sources such as the SAPS annual reports, the victims of crime surveys, and other information. We also looked at the oversight reports and documents that had been generated by the department, and we also identified any key policing and safety concerns that had been identified in the province, as well as developments in the year. As Minister indicated, the report was presented to the Standing Committee in March 2022. It was updated with information and presented to the Provincial Cabinet in August and adopted on the 18th of August. In the process of presenting it to the Standing Committee in March, we did receive feedback from the Metro Police as well as from the SAPS. And then the final report was printed into a hard copy report, which you have in front of you. And it was submitted to the Minister of Police, SAPS commissioners, and all the other stakeholders that I mentioned, and made available on the Western Cape government website. So before I go to the key findings and recommendations, I also just want to highlight the context. So if you can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so actually the presentation you have in front of you shows the murders that have been updated with the latest quarterly figures. We see that in Q3, the Western Cape made up 15.8% of the total murders recorded for the country in Q3. The murder rate for the Western Cape is 16.5 per 100,000 per quarter, which is up from 14.8 per 100,000 for the same quarter the previous year. The Western Cape murder rate is second in the country to the Eastern Cape, which is the highest murder rate. So far this financial year, counting Q1 to Q3, there have been 3,242 murders in the Western Cape. And this amount is higher than the sum of the 3 quarters for the murders over the last 6 years. So we are seeing a concerning trend of an increase of murders in the province. The next slide is the police resource distribution. And here we've been tracking the police resource distribution in the province and nationally over a long period of time. You can see from the shortage of police resources has been a consistent concern that has been raised in the PNP since 2014 and probably even before that. So nationally, we can see that the establishment, the SAPS establishment, has decreased further in 2022 to a total of 176,180. And this is from a high of 199,345 in 2011. So there's quite a sharp decline in the number of police that are available. In order to counteract mostly this decrease is a result of Treasury restrictions in the amount of budget that's been allocated to the police nationally. In order to counteract this, the SAPS have appointed 12,000 new entry-level they have approved 12,000 new entry-level appointees, but as a result of attrition of the police over the last couple of years, the police have estimated that this will only result in an actual de facto 2,000 increase over the period. So in 2022, the numbers are expected to increase to 178,708. The national police to population ratio has also declined to 1 to 430. This declined from 1 to 413 in 2021. If we look at the SAPS establishment in the Western Cape, we can also see that there's a declining trend. This has the number of SAPS officials in the Western Cape has declined over the 4 years and further in 2022 SAPS's granted establishment is 21,267. The actual number of SAPS members has declined to 18,867 in March 2022. This figure is from the Western Cape annual report. SAPS Act members, so those are the actual police officers, have decreased to 15,730 in 2022. And this is down from 16,240 in the previous year. The theoretical human resource requirement is still in place despite an equality court ruling. The SAPS have updated the theoretical human resource requirement and are in negotiations with the complainants in the equality court matter, but this matter has not yet been finalized yet. Looking at the police to population ratio across certain precincts, and here we are quoting from figures that were given to us for 31 March 2022, we can see that at these individual police stations, the police to population ratio has also gotten worse. So all of them are in the red. Harare, Samora Machel, Guguletu, and Delft are all at the population figures of 1 to 800 and over above 1 to 800. Overall, the Western Cape police to population ratio is 1 to 457. Sorry, there is an incorrect number there in the presentation before you. It should be 1 to 457. That is the figure in the Western Cape annual report. The police to population ratio for the whole of the city of the Cape Town is 1 to 622. So we see that the Western Cape police to population ratio is worse than for the whole of the country, and that this population ratio declines in some of our worst affected police precincts. The police precincts that I have highlighted here are the 13 police precincts which the department is focusing on, the province is focusing on, in terms of our deployment of the LEAP officials. Just to also highlight, the next slide is highlighting the impact of LEAP on the murder rate. So the next slide, please. So the province, together with the City of Cape Town, have deployed LEAP officials to 13 high murder precincts in the Western Cape in the City of Cape Town, as well as a reaction unit. And we have been tracking the impact of murder on those LEAP stations. I have here only looked at the statistics up to the end of September. I haven't updated it with the latest quarterly crime statistics. I hadn't yet had time to do that. We can see in this presentation that when we look at the period January to September 22 and compare it with January to September 2019, murder in the Western Cape had increased by 4% when compared with that 2019 period. The reason we looked at 2019 is because that was the pre-COVID year, and we know that there were some unpredicted decreases in murder in the 2020 period and the 2021 year. Over that same period, murder increased by 24% nationally. Areas where LEAP was implemented early in 2022, what we call the LEAP 1 stations, we see that murder had decreased by 12% over those period, whereas control areas, which we included Linguletu West and Manenberg, for example, murder had increased by 45%. Overall, the LEAP areas, the total of the LEAP areas had declined more than the other periods. So just going then into looking at the findings of the 2021-22 report, I haven't updated the key findings, so I'm reporting as they were in the report, because this is how we had done the report. Okay, firstly, and mostly what I'm doing here is focusing on the policing related findings. In the report, we actually had identified issues which related to policing and law enforcement, to public spaces, and also to more social crime prevention issues. But I am mainly going to be highlighting the policing components of that. So in terms of gender-based violence, we had highlighted that that 5.3% of murders in 2021 were domestic violence related. Despite a decrease in reported gender-based violence cases, they were concerned that the gender-based violence had increased over lockdown. There were a number of stations that were identified as the highest contributing stations, and that for the period 1 April to 30 September 2021, 2,548 domestic violence cases were reported to the police in the Western Cape. Our DOCS watching briefs process had also identified a number of shortcomings in gender-based violence cases and the way that these had been dealt with. So our recommendations were that SAPS must ensure that victim-friendly rooms meet all the requirements and are available at all police stations. They must work in collaboration with the Department of Social Development, Victim Empowerment. Volunteers and coordinators must be appointed and trained at all police stations. Our findings had indicated that there had been some attrition of the Victim Empowerment volunteers at many of the police stations and that they weren't functioning effectively. We also recommended that police stations must always have access to DNA collection kits. There had been a problem in that particular year around this, and that SAPS also needed to address the backlog in GBV cases. We also recommended the full capacitation of the Family Violence, Child Protection and Sexual Offences units to address GBV and femicide cases, and also that all SAPS members needed to be trained on how domestic violence and GBV cases needed to be handled, which should include awareness of the empathy needed to assist victims of gender-based violence. We also recommended that first responders must be capacitated to provide victim support, and victims must be kept informed of the progress of their cases and provided with ongoing victim support. We also recommended that the Western Cape Government as a whole should continue to address gender-based violence through its transversal gender-based violence steering committee or a similar structure. And this is, I'm happy to say, an ongoing process. The next slide refers to substance abuse. All of our PNP workshops identified substance abuse and drug dealing as crime generators, and this continues to be a concern that was raised in the PNP workshops this year and last year. Since 2013-14, the Western Cape province has been ranked as the province with the highest proportion of drug-related crime. This is obviously a huge concern for the Western Cape. Drug-related crimes decreased by 28% in the 2020-21 year, and this is mainly as a result of the Constitutional Court ruling, which made DACA-related offences, which changed the ruling around that, made it permissible for individuals to use DACA. But SAPS reported that 7.4% of drug-related crimes were in respect of dealing, and this was up from 7.3% in the previous year. And also, the Western Cape Police Ombudsman had conducted an inquiry into the SAPS's handling of drug-related crimes. Our recommendations were that substance abuse and drugs are key drivers of crime and violence. The root causes need to be addressed using a multi-pronged approach. Substance abusers must be given adequate support and treatment opportunities. This is obviously a recommendation that affects the whole of government as well as stakeholders outside of government. We recommend a harms reduction approach to policing and law enforcement should be adopted. We also recommended a considered policing and law enforcement approach, which entails intelligence-led operations to be brought against drug dealers and those higher in the criminal network. We also recommended that K9 units should be involved in the policing of drug-related crimes. Law enforcement plays a key role in the policing of B crimes and allowing SAPS to concentrate on the more serious forms of crimes. And we can see that law enforcement does play a big role in terms of drug-related arrests and confiscations. We also recommended that we strengthen law enforcement operations around liquor outlets and ensure that law enforcement officers are trained in de-escalation of violence around this. And then we also recommended that the Western Cape Liquor Authority should continue to ensure compliance with licensing conditions. The next slide, we made some recommendations around the policing of murder and serious violent crime. If you can just, yeah. Here we recommended that the SAPS adopt a policing approach that responds to a clear understanding of the patterns, causes, and nature of murder and serious crime. So this requires that the SAPS analyze what is happening in terms of murder and violent crime in each precinct and understand the different motivators and contributors to those particular crimes, and also where murder is most likely to occur. We recommended that an area-based approach be implemented where the SAPS work collaboratively with law enforcement, government, and civil society stakeholders. And this is a strategy of the province as well. And then we also recommended that there be a focus on reducing firearm-related violence, and that the provincial firearm harms reduction strategy be implemented. I think we have also previously reported to this committee on the firearm harms reduction strategy. The next slide deals with gang-related crime. Gang-related, if you can just continue with the, again, thanks. Gang-related violence and crime is very rife in the Western Cape. A high percentage of murders, particularly in the priority areas, are gang-related. The SAPS anti-gang unit was established in the Western Cape in 2018, and we saw that as a positive progress and development that happened since this problem had been identified. And a number of gang stations, about 33, were identified, and they've been targeted for particular operations. Our recommendations were that SAPS must capacitate the anti-gang unit so that it's able to conduct intelligence-led operations and to monitor its impact, and also that there's proper detection and investigation of gang-related crimes once they occur. We also recommended the adoption of a multi-stakeholder approach to working with communities and working with youth at risk of joining gangs, and a focus on investigation and prosecution of organised gang-related crime. This is a serious problem that continues to plague the Western Cape Province, Chairperson, as I'm sure you are aware. And then we also recommended to implement the provincial response to the National Anti-Gang Strategy. And here we have a Provincial Priorities Committee where we work very closely with the SAPS, the Metro Police and law enforcement, as well as all government departments around the implementation of an anti-gang strategy. The next slide focuses on the policing of firearms and ammunition. We know that between 46 and 47% of murders in the Western Cape are as a result of shot-related murders, but this does increase in certain of the murder hotspots. So we say that SAPS must continue to focus on the recovery of firearms and confiscations through stop and search, as well as through intelligence-led operations. We see a number of recent operations that have led to the confiscation of a large number of firearms and ammunition, and that is obviously as a result of informers and intelligence-led operations. But we also recommend that firearm stockpiles must be closely managed. We see that in the past where firearms have been leaked from the firearm stockpiles, these have been leaked into the community and have contributed to the high levels of firearm violence. So we recommend that SAPS must report on all firearms and ammunition lost or stolen from the exhibit stores or from members of the SAPS. Confiscated firearms need to be destroyed on a more regular basis. This has been not happening on an annual basis. We're also concerned that firearms are only destroyed in Gauteng and they need to be transported to Gauteng where they are destroyed there. We also recommend there needs to be further regulation around the sale of ammunition to prevent large amounts of ammunition being bought and sold or lent to criminally minded people. And this is an issue that needs to be taken up through the legislation. SAPS must ensure that firearm and firearm-related offences are thoroughly investigated so that these can be prosecuted in court, and we are working closely with the NPA, and the NPA is working closely with SAPS in order to ensure that this happens. And then through the Prov joints to implement the firearm harms reduction strategy. Next slide is around the policing approach. We call for greater collaboration with all law enforcement authorities. And this requires joint planning and operations. So we have a number of law enforcement, Metro Police and SAPS, which are working together well across the province, but we recommend greater joint planning and operations, which would be supported by the sharing of crime information and threats in order to implement an effective hotspots approach to policing. We think that there are quite a number of improvements that can be made in this regard. We also need to look at improving various technological platforms. We have a number of different technologies that are in place across the province and in the city, which don't necessarily integrate with the SAPS platform, and we need to look at how to better integrate those different platforms. We also have CCTV footage available in the city, as well as privately established CCTV footage and drone technology, which can all provide crime information. And then we are also looking at the integration of radio technology and systems across the province as well. So these are areas where we require further engagement. In terms of strengthening the SAPS resources, I think I've already spoken to this. We need to strengthen the police numbers, to increase police numbers, but also to ensure that police are allocated to areas where there is most need for them. And this goes to the heart of the theoretical human resource requirement process, which determines the allocation of police resources. But we're also saying that new members must be recruited, trained and deployed. And we're also saying that we're suggesting that the police basic curricula for police officers must be revised to ensure more practical training and a focus on skills required by constables immediately on their deployment. There must also be in-field and on-the-job supervision, and trainers must include experienced police officers so that they can share from their experience. In terms of strengthening the SAPS resources, the physical resources, if you can continue, please. These also need to be strengthened. There's noted a frequent concern of shortages in terms of police resources, including equipment, police uniforms, vehicles, horses, bicycles, community service centre space, as well as demands for new police stations. In addition, repairs to vehicles and equipment take far too long, leaving the police without these much needed resources. We've seen some vehicles sitting unmaintained for a long period of time. So our recommendation is that vehicle fleet management needs to be improved and delays in repairing vehicles needs to be addressed. Government garages must ensure that service standards are maintained and that vehicles are serviced within the shortest turnaround time. And the police to vehicle ratio needs to be improved. We should also indicate that we recommend that the type of vehicle that are procured for different areas also needs to be looked at, particularly in the more rural areas where police are driving on sand roads and rough farm roads. They need to have vehicles that can cope with that terrain. Also in terms of strengthening police resources, at the time that we had done the report, there was a huge emphasis on vandalism of infrastructure, arson and vandalism and destruction of the railway environment, as well as the coaches and trains. And this had led to a dysfunctional railway system. I think the province is still struggling, the province and national government is still struggling to overcome the problems that had occurred then. There is still an ongoing problem of theft of copper. Our recommendation is that we need to develop a strategy to ensure that effective policing of the railway environment, to ensure the safety of commuters and staff, as well as the railway assets and infrastructure. We also made a recommendation for the strengthening of the number of police reservists. Here we're talking about the figures from 2019, which haven't been updated. I know that a number of the new police recruits were recruited from reservists, depleting the number of reservists available to the Western Cape. The Western Cape last year also went on a recruitment strategy for new reservists, but I'm not yet sure of the numbers. This is obviously a key focus area for the police as a way of supporting the police and getting additional boots on the ground. In terms of strengthening police resources and detectives, in 2019, a DOCS study found that there were 2,785 detectives at 150 police stations. 48% had a caseload of over 200 dockets, which is 333% over the 50 to 60 case docket norm. Our finding was that the Western Cape does not have sufficient detectives to investigate the space of of criminality and gangsterism in the province, and also the high levels of murder, extortion, and other kinds of crimes that are occurring. There was a shortage at that time of 548 detectives in the province, and 142 posts remained vacant. The detection rate for all serious crimes, excluding crimes dependent on police action, had declined to 37%. So, Chairperson, in 2020-21, only 37% of all crimes detected had, all serious crimes had actually been detected. And DOCS, through its various oversight processes, had identified a number of shortcomings in the investigation process. Excuse me. So we recommended that in 2019, the SAPS had announced that a detective academy was to be established. As far as I know, this has not happened. We would recommend that this still be established and that all SAPS members are properly trained as detectives, those that are required to be the detectives. We also recommended advanced and specialized detective training that must include training on how to collect and deal with DNA buccal samples. In terms of strengthening the integrated case docket management system, next slide please, we also had identified a number of shortcomings with the management of the integrated case docket management system as well as the docket archive stores. And we recommended that detectives must be trained on the implementation of this ICDMS. And all stations must ensure that they appoint vetted members to manage the docket archive stores. All stations must conduct an audit of training needs for data typists and detectives to utilize the system. And all stations must ensure that they adhere to the minimum requirements of National Instruction 13 of 2017. In terms of corruption was another issue that had been identified. And here we said that SAPS needs to call attention, the next slide please, to police culture to ensure that corruption does not flourish. Management and political leadership need to give very clear signals through their speeches and actions that corruption will not be tolerated. And the SAPS anti-corruption unit needs to continue investigating allegations of corruption and to ensure that corrupt members are prosecuted. The performance of this unit should also be monitored. There also needs to be strong partnerships built with the community and civil society to ensure that the community comes forward to report corrupt members in their community. And we do find that this is an ongoing problem. In terms of the forensic laboratories, we called for an urgent need for SAPS to address the problems with the forensic science laboratories and the backlog in forensic DNA testing. I'm happy to see that the Minister, Minister Tsele, did report that on Friday that the backlog in the DNA samples has been cleared. So we look forward to seeing a faster turnaround in the investigation. At the time of that particular report, there was also a delay in the procurement of buccal sample kits, and this needed to be improved so that all police stations were adequately equipped. But also SAPS need to ensure that all members are trained on how to use these kits appropriately, as well as the safe storage and conveyance, as well as the crime train management. In terms of sick leave, we made recommendations around the proper management of sick leave. Obviously, during the COVID period, quite a number of members were sick and off sick leave. We also lost a number of members from the service altogether, and requiring a very strong focus on this area. Then in terms of effective deployment of members, next slide. Given that there is a declining number of police available for deployment, our recommendation, based on evidence, is that police action is most effective when it is directed at specific places and targeted at specific people or groups and towards defined problems. So rather than just having a randomized patrol, that police are more specifically targeted to where crime is occurring or is likely to occur. The deployment of human resources is dependent then on accurate crime and demographic data, and this is down to a geographic micro level, down to what the SAPS refer to as a CAS block level. The area-based approach is currently being implemented as part of the Western Cape Safety Plan process, and this requires a collaboration from SAPS law enforcement as well as other key safety stakeholders. But we also need to monitor this approach and to measure its impact on crime over this period. And then we just want to highlight the role of different provincial priority role players. So just to give you an outline, the Western Cape Government's safety priority approach is focused on 3 different lenses. So one lens is improving law enforcement effectiveness and coordination, which is pretty much what I have summarized for you now. But we also have a focus on strengthening social protective factors against violence and improving safety infrastructure in public spaces. And all of this is managed and reported through a safety cabinet, provincial safety cabinet, and is headed by different MECs and departments. The MEC Alan, as well as the MEC for Health and the Department of Health and Department for Community Safety are lead for the improving law enforcement effectiveness and collaboration stream. So our PNP process has identified the roles for all stakeholders, and I'm just briefly going to identify the roles for different stakeholders. So in terms of the law enforcement response, there's a need for the Department of Community Safety to improve oversight over the SAPS and Metro Police, as well as through the over law enforcement. We don't have a legal mandate for oversight over law enforcement, but it is something we do through our collaborative relationship. We also are advocating for the devolution of policing powers to the Western Cape, and that is a stance that is taken by the Western Cape Government. We also aim to improve collaboration between local government law enforcement and SAPS, and that's through also strengthening and upskilling local government law enforcement. We continue to support the LEAP program as well as canine units in the districts, and also to strengthen law enforcement capacity. We're coordinating the anti-gang and firearm harms reduction implementation strategies, and then across government we're supporting data-led, evidence-led interventions in policing. And then finally, we also have a role in terms of advocating for the implementation of the policing needs and priorities with SAPS, as well as to monitor the progress of these over time. In terms of social and protective factors, we make recommendations to improve support to victims and the Victim Empowerment Program, and this is with the Department of Social Development, as well as to implement strategies to reduce substance abuse and treatment, to address alcohol-related harms through treatment, awareness and regulation, as well as to implement family strengthening programs. And this is a need that has been identified throughout the province, and as well as also to implement programs to address gender-based violence. Then in terms of safety infrastructure and safe spaces, there's a need to implement an area-based approach, which is a safe place-making approach. So to identify problem spaces and buildings and to look at solutions to make those places safe. We also recommend a need to ensure safety at commuter hubs and to deal with the problem of taxi conflict, as well as to ensure adequate lighting, roads and housing, safeguard railway infrastructure, create safe spaces for sports and recreation, as well as to ensure CCTV in hotspots and effective monitoring and response time to incidents which are identified through that. And then finally, I'm just going to highlight the process that we followed for this 2022-23 year. So in this year, we aim to review the state of policing in each district and the province, and to make recommendations for the implementation by SAPS, Metro Police, as well as other stakeholders. We conducted 5 district engagements from August 2020 to January 2023. Actually, we finished that early February. There were rural safety engagements and PNP engagement. There were two-day engagements. The rural safety engagements, we partnered with the Department of Agriculture, and then the PNP engagement, we also collaborated very strongly with the Department of Health around those. We had between 120 and 180 participants at each engagement from national, provincial and local government, as well as CPF's neighbourhood watchers and farm watchers. And then in January and February, we held 2 engagements, one in the Metro East and the Metro West districts. We also conducted desktop analysis and oversight reports. And just to say that in our district engagements, we held focus group discussions with all of the participants, and we had 3 focus group discussions that were focusing on the law enforcement environment, on the safe spaces environment, and on the social cohesion environment. So our recommendations will really follow the Western Cape Government 3-pronged approach. An additional aspect of our PNP process for this year is we aim to strengthen the nature of our policy recommendations to SAPS and to other stakeholders. And so we commissioned 6 policy briefs from policing experts. The first one is commissioned by Dr. Andrew Fall from the Institute for Security Studies, and he wrote a paper on policing to address a serious violent crime in the Western Cape. Then we had Professor Lucas Minting from the Dalla Omer Institute at the University of the Western Cape, wrote a report on dealing with corruption in the police through effective monitoring and oversight. Dr. Jean Redpath from the same institute wrote a paper on local government and law enforcement. Dr. Guy Lamb from the University of Stellenbosch wrote a paper on firearm violence and firearm control in the Western Cape. And Nathaniel Ruloff from what's the name of from the Safety Lab, sorry, wrote a paper on policing gang-related violence. And then Themba Masuku, also from the African Policing Civilian Oversight Forum, wrote a paper on public order policing and implications for the Western Cape. So and then we held a workshop to discuss the findings of these. So we are in the process now of analysing all of the recommendations from the district engagements as well as from the police experts. We're integrating the report and we're drafting the report. We're hoping to have the report finalised by the end of March and that it will be submitted to the Standing Committee shortly after that in the new financial year. We will also be publishing separate policy briefs on each of these 6 areas. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Ms. Dissel. I hope that the Minister and the other colleagues will answer the questions because you've just done quite a marathon, and I hope they give you a bit of a break in the answering of the questions. Members, that is the presentation. Can I get an indication of who would like to go first with a round of questions? I see Member Barnes, Member Kasim. Is there anybody in the House that I haven't noticed? I see Member Barnes, Member Kasim, Member Bartman, and then Member Kama online.
Thank you very much, Chair. Chair, I think I only have a few comments, though I won't go deep into questioning. I must say, let me start with the presentation. Yesterday, I wanted to prepare as a newcomer coming back to this committee. I wanted to prepare, and when I looked for the presentation, I couldn't find it. And I must say it's a bit disappointing because one always wants to prepare yourself when you come to a meeting of this nature. So I think hence I don't have much questions, but I must say also with regards to the booklet that we are having, at least one would have also appreciated getting it up front. My first 2-3 questions, Chair, will be on, let me start at the end. I think right at the end, I was looking through the presentation and I think Minister is addressing my question. That was the first one that I have jotted down because I was asking myself as we are doing planning here, I can see the entire presentation, the first 32 pages. There's nothing that really speaks of rural areas and engagements, but at least when I saw now on page 17 and page 34, slide 17 and slide 33 and 34, one could get at least a feeling that there's something spoken about rural safety engagements. What I would want to know, my first question is, what are those engagements, and perhaps if we could be enlightened on the outcomes and progress, what is made through the rural engagements. And then my second one maybe would be a comment rising from one of the slides that was speaking of physical resources on police vehicles. I think that one should be more directed to SAPS itself, which is no, SAPS is here. I must say that from the needs that have been showed, I think at another presentation we have done oversight and we came across a shortage of vehicles that was very much imminent, and one would have wanted to share your feeling on what you have seen during the oversight that we had, especially in Kanaland. I think it was Calitzdorp. And then the safety priorities. Also, it says it envisages a role of multiple role players. What I want to know from the Minister Chair is if you could also update us or enlighten us, who are these role players as identified by the BNP, and what has been done so far also with regards to that. Yesterday, I attended one engagement from Minister Mbombo where she was speaking on GBV. I must say, I think SAPS was also there when they were giving the stats on FAC, I think something like that. GBV at times, when we are looking at statistics, hence I said I would have appreciated having this much earlier because I have a certain interest when it comes to GBV. Many a times, cases are not recorded, especially in the rural areas. In the rural areas, there's this thing that you don't need to go and report when it's your husband that is beating you up. So I wanted to know that from the gender base, I note also the recommendations made by the department, and I welcome them. However, I have another question that I would want to know is that what is the transversal steering committee? I know that there's a recommendation speaking of transversal committee. Lastly, Chair, I think Minister was speaking of a vacancy note. I have interest in that because he spoke of 720. I lost him at some point, and then he said now there's a 1118 that he was speaking about. If he could also give us a feeling or as to where and what this vacancy rate is, because it's just a number. What is it all about? For now, Chair, I think I'm going to pause. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just a reminder, members, we are engaging with the department. The SAPS officials with us are just observing. They will make their inputs on the 7th when they submit their report to us. Member Kasim, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Are there any plans to roll out mobile SAPS and law enforcement facilities, especially in farms and informal settlements which are far from police stations? Here, gender-based violence, rape and crime is high and makes things difficult for residents to seek assistance. Here women are also think that it's okay to be abused because there's no education or safe space for them to run to in such situations. And here, once again, cases of abuse or rape won't be recorded, as the previous speaker stated, because there's nowhere to run to during such times. Secondly, what are the actual plans to remove drug dens and gangs from our communities, especially here on the Cape Flats, other than patrolling in these areas? We know where the drug dens are. We know where the drugs are being sold daily. We know where the gangsters are located with the illegal firearms. Yet we fail to go in to confiscate it in some of the major drug and gang-infested communities, specifically here on the Cape Flats. More so, the response of law enforcement and SAPS is extremely slow when it comes to reporting to crime. I was on oversight with Sub-Council 17 in the city's control room in Guru, which gives a view of all the hotspots and streets in Cape Town. This was 2 months ago. And operators were watching live drug dealing, zooming in on the actual individuals selling drugs and with firearms and whatever involved, but I had not logged a call to law enforcement at the time to drive out to the area until I questioned it. There were 4 vans in the area, and just as an example, but not a single van made its way there until after an hour. By the time they arrived there, those individuals were obviously gone and missing. On the issue of, I just want to get back to the mobile SAPS facilities. Red zones or areas being flagged as red zones has made things very difficult, extremely difficult for residents, where we find that even ambulance services and other services does not enter or would only assist injured or ill residents from a certain point, like in the case of Sikalo informal settlement as one example, where residents need to cross a busy main road, already in dying conditions, to get to an ambulance, who refuse to enter the informal settlements for their own safety, because we know that even these emergency service officials are scared to enter. So what plans do SAPS and law enforcement have to work hand in hand in order to assist these poor people in informal settlements? Thank you.
Thank you, Member Kama. Do you want to go since you are also online?
Yes, no, thank you, Chair. And let me welcome the presentation. I think I just have 1 or 2 questions, Chair. Others I will ask when we're having the engagement with SAPS, because I think we really need that response so that we are able to ask these questions informed by the response, also in terms of what is the status at this stage. But there's one interesting note, Chair, at the beginning of the presentation, which indicates that there is no definition of what is the policing needs and priorities, and how the police ministry itself should take this report to account or respond to the report. Now, what I want to check, Chair, is because I think this is a concern, and I have an interest and think that it would assist, in getting that seamless engagement about these provincial policing needs and priorities. So I just want to check as to what has been done to make suggestions from the department side around the definition of what this should be, and the issue of how the National Police Ministry should take them into account. The other question or clarity that I want to have, I hear, or in the presentation, they continuously, there is a call that is made about integration of systems and technologies with other stakeholders. I want to get the clarity around that, as to which stakeholders are these, understanding that when you deal with organized and other serious crimes themselves, you would need vetted people within the SAPS to deal with those matters. So you don't want to have a situation where unvetted and unscrupulous characters also have access, to such systems, because sorry about that, Chair. As is, it is only SAPS that has the mandate, and all others should do so by law under the command of SAPS. The other question that I have, Chair, around the alcohol harms reduction that is mentioned here, I just want to check as to how far is the department with the process of making sure that we, at the level of the province, have laws that deal with this issue, understanding that there was an alcohol harms reduction white paper that is in place. And lastly, around the issue of drug dealing or drug abuse or activities, I saw that the Ombudsman is said to having had an investigation around these issues, and I remember even the issue of drug houses would have been part of the issues that were highly raised at the time. Now, I want to check whether is the department doing an analysis when it comes to the closing of drug houses and checking as to how many of these houses are owned by the city itself, and I think I would have heard SAPS on other occasions talking about the difficulty of them when they ask the city to assist in the closure of these houses where drug dealing would have been identified. Those are the questions for now, Chair. Thanks.
Thank you, Member Kama. Member Bartman.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, on slide 11 regarding the minus 12% in the rollout of LEAP 1, I just wanted to say congratulations to the Minister and the Department for seeing these outcomes, especially with LEAP 2 and LEAP 3. I know that there has been increases, but when one compares it to the national averages and the progress over time, it shows that something is being done and that it is working. So in that regard, I wanted to find out, has there been any feedback from the SAPS officials from those respective police stations where LEAP has been implemented towards the department? Have they been able to tell you what the difference has been in their work? What specifically were the elements in the work environment that has changed? Chair, I think I might be confused because on the 15th of Feb, when Mr. Wasim Matthews sent out the meeting request to us, I saw the PNP report, this particular document, electronically in the meeting invite, and I checked my meeting invite today, it's also in there, and I remember the procedural officer also delivering a hard copy to me, but perhaps that is just in my email. On the next question on slide 13, it's regarding the police ombudsman's investigation into SAP's handling of drug-related crimes. I might miss it, but I'm not sure if I've seen where those outcomes are or if those outcomes are available, and what have we found that we need to now do in order to improve upon this. Then on slide 17, there's been obviously a request for greater collaboration, but what would this greater collaboration look like? And what is currently preventing that greater collaboration that was mentioned? That is all for now. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Member Bartman. Just to close off this round, a question from me. On page 26 of the PNP, there's mention made of the 12 closed-circuit TV cameras. Are those the only stations in the Western Cape that has functioning CCTV cameras? And then also, in terms of the firearm stockpile leaks, does the department have the numbers of the amount of firearms that have leaked from these stockpiles? Is that something the department keeps track of? Thank you. I'll then hand over to the department.
Chairperson, thank you so much. I will commence in fielding some of these particular questions, and if I've missed any particular question, it will then be handled by the relevant official. But if I can also just state, I am delighted that we have SAPS in the room, because on the one hand, colleagues, I'm wanting to be as crystal clear as possible. Chairperson, if we just go to the very first slide with regard to number 1. Number 1 speaks gender-based violence on page 12. We have added in the Western Cape government should continue to address GBV through its transversal GBV steering committee or similar. Chairperson, I'm raising that particular point because these policing needs and priorities cuts across the South African Police Service, law enforcement in the city of Cape Town, our rural areas, together with Western Cape government departments. I'm sitting here knowing that we have a key role to play in that regard, and I will speak to the greater collaboration on how I see that can be fostered. But on the one hand, colleagues, it is about how each and every entity is playing, should be playing its role, and holding each other holding each other then duly accountable in that regard. So against that backdrop, I am delighted that the presentation and the booklet has been sent. Member Barnes, I will make sure that in future that presentations are sent timeously. I do want to apologize that the presentation that we actually flighted today wasn't sent timeously, but I am delighted that the booklet was circulated via the procedural officer as well. In terms of the rural safety engagements, over the last 9 months, as per the presentation, we have had these rural safety engagements, and I am deeply delighted that on the one hand, we have had stakeholders in the room between 120 and 180 from senior SAPS members, district commissioners, to relevant district correctional service members, relevant departmental members within the Western Cape government, and our various stakeholders. That includes our CPFs, that includes our farm watchers, our neighborhood watchers, private security companies. So we've had an array of safety stakeholders in that particular engagements, and it is a direct reflection from what we are seeing at MINMEC. So at MINMEC, we would have a number of entities that will be presenting, and that even includes the NPA, it even includes IPID. So we are wanting to engage each and every stakeholder and not leave any stakeholder out. In the House earlier last week, I made mention with regards to the big role that the Department of Correctional Services needs to play. So we are not wanting to leave any stakeholder out because we are all having a key role to play in that regard. But if there's anything I missed in terms of Teresa, maybe in terms of the rural safety, if you want to add, but the police resources, I think if I caught the question correctly, we had a policing needs and priorities engagement last year in March. On that particular engagement, it was together with the South African Police Service, and a figure of 720 members were allocated to our province, 720. I then wrote to the PC and to National Minister in terms of our policing needs and priorities, and I've received a letter back dated the 11th of April. That was just before my appointment into this particular role. And in that letter, it was indicated that our new and revised allocation will be 1,118. New recruits will be coming to the Western Cape. So it's an increase from 720 to 1,118. Any increase should always be welcomed. However, I do know it's still sadly lacking, because to answer the secondary question in that, and I've asked Amanda to do the sums for me, in that we currently have a 17% vacancy rate. So we have what we call the granted establishment. That is the amount that is budgeted for, and that current figure is on page number 9, which is 21,267 granted. Not ideal, just a granted budgeted amount, and we are currently sitting on 18,867. And Amanda confirms to me that that is a 17.
It was the actual police, sorry, Minister.
Yes.
When I looked at the actual police members as against the granted establishment for SAPS members.
Yes.
Yeah.
If we look at the actual amount, what is actually there, it differs about in 17% to the granted amount. That does not entirely bode well for our province, considering that in the entire actual amount, we also have Public Service Act employees that won't be your uniform gun-carrying SAPS officers, and that amount is 15,000. That's why we are always saying that we are wanting to strengthen the hand of the South African Police Service. We are wanting to help the SAPS in our province, because we wouldn't want any form of under-resourcing in our particular province. So the Gender-Based Transversal Committee deals with a number of matters, brings in a number of government departments, and our role in terms of the gender-based violence activities and programs that we do is something that I'm deeply passionate about. For example, one is that we monitor the implementation of the Domestic Violence Act. Chairperson, when we do our monitoring and we make our recommendations in that regard, it is station specific. We go to Mfuleni, we go to Khayelitsha, and we then monitor how many protection orders were served, training that happened in that particular unit, for example. And we are then able to monitor and evaluate it so that 100% of protection orders can be served, so that a female that is needing the protection, that is needing to call SAPS when a perpetrator approaches her again and potentially assaulting her again, we are wanting to make sure that she is armed with that protection order so that that perpetrator can actually land up behind bars. So we are monitoring the implementation of the Domestic Violence Act, but also we make the recommendations there too. But even in the court watching briefs, when we monitor a number of assault cases, rape cases, GBV cases, to make sure that where there's inefficiencies in the South African Police Service, inefficiencies in the entire system, to make sure that those cases are re-enrolled onto the court. We also talk there about the work that our neighborhood watchers are doing and now being trained as first responders in GBV as well. So each and every department has a role to play in terms of eradicating and fighting gender-based violence. I sincerely trust, Chairperson, that I've touched on the vacancy rate and that one is clear. On the drug dens, Member Kasim, thank you so much for that particular question. I am due to receive an update in the next 2 weeks with regards to the last quarter and the amount of drug dens that were actually closed. I wouldn't want to encroach on this committee, but I would be more than happy to suggest that this particular committee invites the South African Police Service in that regard, because in 2020, we submitted a request to the Police Ombudsman in order to investigate the amount of known drug houses. At the time, it was confirmed that we have 1,557 known drug houses. That figure has since reduced, and I don't have the actual amount of reductions sitting here, and I wouldn't want to give a figure that could be incorrect. So as soon as I get that particular figure back on how many has been closed, I will then make sure that that is circulated to the standing committee as well. But further to that, I would want to touch on the question raised by Member Kama, in that the figure between private property and rental stock in the city of Cape Town and in other municipalities, I also do not have offhand, but I would be more than happy to source the latest information from the SAPS and from the city and make sure that we are able to communicate that to the standing committee. Member Kama, it remains a concern to me that even if it's rental stock in any municipality, even if it's private property, I firmly believe that that particular house, that particular drug den needs to be shut. And I am aware of a number of drug dens, and I've said this too often in this house, that some have sold drugs to 3 generations. Hulle verkoop die dwelms aan die oupa, die seun en nou die kleinkind. So we are wanting to make sure that those drug dens are shut, but I wouldn't want to, like I say, encroach on this committee and recommend to call in the Ombudsman and the SAPS in that regard, because the informal settlements is also deeply concerning to me. And I'm going to make mention now again of one particular area. And Member Kasim highlighted informal settlements and the dangers attached thereto. I think in our presentation on slide number 28, we have highlighted that our safety priority is improving law enforcement, the effectiveness and the coordination. Knowing that we need law enforcement, we need South African Police Service, We need that particular arm, we need that particular approach, but also in terms of what we are doing in strengthening social protective factors, looking at the root causes of crime, the work that other departments are doing in terms of gangsterism, in terms of drug abuse, in terms of GBV. So looking at those root causes, but also improving safety infrastructure in public spaces. I mention that because the area of Umfuleni is concerning. It's concerning for a number of reasons. Number one is that the area of Umfuleni over the last 10 years have literally doubled, and it could be more, in population that that particular police precinct is servicing. We have heard and we have seen and we have visited a number of the informal settlements in close proximity to the Umfuleni SAP station. However, despite the increase in population that that particular precinct should now be servicing, we have not seen an increase in SAPS members at the Umfuleni SAP station. We have a number of realities in our country, and the reality for the Umfuleni area was compounded during COVID, when an additional 3 informal settlements popped up in the Umfuleni area, and one is probably named quite amply as COVID city. So we've seen how Umfuleni, and I want to say this again, talking about the informal settlements, because on the one hand, Member Kasim, and through you, Chairperson, I'm also concerned about SAPS members. I'm also concerned about our law enforcement officers. I'm also concerned about the LEAP officers that is also deployed in Umfuleni, because to monitor and to police those informal settlements is deeply challenging, considering that there's lighting, there's structural matters with regards to policing. So that remains a concern for me. In terms of Member Kama's question to the no definition on the PNPs, I think my comment, I'm going to try to make my comment as clear as possible, but Amanda, if you are able to come in here, I think it is a known fact that each and every province has different needs. Our need in our province will differ from Limpopo. Gang-related murders in our province contributes to over 80%. Marcelina, are you able to give me the correct figure? I don't want to get this wrong.
Well, in the province itself, Minister, it's 19% of all murders in the latest quarter.
But in the country, it represents 80? In
the country, it's over 80%, yes.
Colleagues, so just to put that into context, we have 19% of our murders in the last quarter were gang-related. The motives were gang-related. But that figure contributes to over 80% of gang-related murders in our entire country. So gang violence and gang-related activities is a huge need in our province. So the reason, or I would say that I'm satisfied by the fact that there's no definition or clear definition on what the policing needs and priorities should be, because this speaks directly to what we are advocating for. Our policing needs and priorities. The residents of the Western Cape's policing needs and priorities, because we want to strengthen the arm of the SAPS in our province that have a different set of needs to that needs of Limpopo. The residents also have different needs and different safety concerns to that of Limpopo. And how we tackle that should be very direct, it should be very deliberate, and that's why we are making the call for policing powers at a provincial level as well, together with an increase in the Metro Police for investigative purposes, but that's the reason. It's basically to make sure that our policing needs and priorities are taken into account. Member Kama, I'm not sure if I captured the entire question with regard to the unvetted members, but maybe Amanda caught that question, but if I can comment in that regard, in that the anti-gang unit, and I'm not sure if the chairperson is able to refresh my memory, as well, in that on the granted establishment, on the granted amount for the AGU in our province, since 2018 and since the establishment of that particular unit, they've never functioned to its full granted capacity. The chairperson might have an actual answer to a parliamentary question in that regard, with regards to how many were granted and how many do we actually have in the AGU, because one of my engagements with the South African Police Service is to make sure that even the AGU members are all vetted. I'm wanting to make sure that certain specialized units that are doing key work in our province should ultimately be vetted, but I'm not sure if I've captured the entire question correctly from Member Kama. And I'm going to place on the record. I'm going to place on record again, Chairperson, that the
Minister?
Yes.
You asked for help, and we are a service delivery oriented portfolio, so let me help you out. There's a 38% vacancy rate, and that was as of last year. So of the 232 granted positions, only 144 police officers are currently deployed. And we also do know that those police officers are very often taken, the AGU officers are very often taken from stations, from their locations as well.
Baie dankie, Chairperson. Colleagues, I dislike repeating stuff that upsets me, but I think 232, as confirmed by the Chairperson, AGU members granted, the actual amount only 144, when over 80% of all gang-related murders in our country happens in our province, 38%. But I want to state, the LEAP officers, Member Kama through you, Chairperson, the LEAP officers work under the direct command of each and every SAPS station commander. So where they are deployed, they are working under the command of the South African Police Service, because we fully believe in an integrated approach in collaborating with all law enforcement agencies, but also because the South African Police Service would have further powers to that of LEAP officers, and that includes investigative powers. And we would want to make sure that our LEAP officers are working in collaboration, where they are able to increase the boots on the ground, where they are able to use resources and make sure that we are ultimately bringing down the murder rate and other forms of contact crime. We have seen in some of our areas tremendous success between the collaboration. In some areas still, it could be far better. Colleagues will also be aware that there is a sense that whenever you are working amongst people, certain dynamics and certain characters and certain personalities could potentially block us from fostering valuable working relationships. And even in the safety spaces, we are often seeing that. We are often seeing that purely because of a certain personality type, because of someone's character or their perceived character, it might be an indication for one or two people not wanting to work with that particular person. But we've been very clear that the safety stakeholders should ultimately be fostering valuable working relationships. We should build that on openness, on transparency, on honesty, so that we can ultimately breach the gap between, in order to work together. I will ask that Amanda tackle the question with regards to the alcohol harms reduction, but I do want to highlight that over the last financial year, in this financial year, for the very first time, the Western Cape Liquor Authority was able to visit each and every licensed premises. We've also seen how we've had an increase in terms of the inspectors that we have on the ground that is able to investigate and visit those liquor outlets that are registered. We have also implemented what we call a Section 64. A Section 64 is basically whereby if an outlet is non-compliant, they will not be automatically receiving their renewal. So we are wanting to make sure that there is compliance. We will never shy away from compliance, because we know that those outlets need to be compliant while we strike the balance towards economic growth in a particular area and the business aspect there too. But it's always striking that balance, but we would want no particular outlet in any of our communities to operate outside of the confines of the law, and we would hold them duly accountable and not reward automatic and not reward those outlets with an automatic renewal if there's matters where they were not compliant. With regards to the LEAP stations, and I'm not sure if I heard the question correctly online, but we are looking at interventions, and it was announced during the SOPA. We are also looking at certain interventions with regards to bases. A base will ultimately be whereby if we take the area of Delft, for example, and I'm able to confirm that the area of Delft has a LEAP deployment. The area of Delft has currently the highest amount of LEAP officers that is working under the command of the South African Police Service, working with the South African Police Service and other law enforcement agencies in that particular area, which includes Metro Police and our neighborhood watches, but also building partnerships. And in Delft, 1 kilometer away from the Delft SAP station is an NGO. And that NGO does work in terms of gender-based violence, in terms of youth development, and in terms of cultural activities. We have a LEAP base at that particular NGO as well, so that we can create a sense of safety around that particular area. LEAP officers will be between the station and that particular NGO, so that we can spread the awareness and the visibility, because a number of females and young people visit that particular center, and the center is named The Hope, which I think this committee should consider to visit as well. But that's what we are doing in that particular spaces, Member Kama and Member Kasim. We are needing to make sure that where the footprint is, that our LEAP officers can be deployed, or they can have their coffee break, for example, like many SAPS members do at a particular garage. And I highly appreciate that type of interaction between business, NGOs, and law enforcement. When I see certain problematic spots, and when I'm out evenings working, and at 11 o'clock or 12 o'clock at night, there would be some garages that will ultimately provide coffee to our SAPS members, so that they can stop there to have a cup of coffee, create a sense of visibility in that particular area, because there will still be residents coming to that fuel station. It creates safety. It creates an atmosphere where if someone goes to that particular garage to fill up, he or she will feel safer. And we are trying that with other bases as well. And I'm not at liberty now to mention what is still in the pipeline, but I'm trusting that we are going to be able to see that, especially in our priority areas. And I'm very open that if any member of this committee is aware of NGOs that are doing good work within our priority areas, and if we can have a discussion on the role that LEAP can play in that particular area, because we wouldn't just want LEAP to be deploying from the SAP station directly. They can do a check-in at a particular NGO where there's X amount of foot traffic. I sincerely trust that that makes sense. And that, Member Bartman, through you, Chairperson, speaks to the greater collaboration. The greater collaboration is also felt differently in each and every community. We have research, and one of the research documents that we have is that we have been able to establish that there is social cohesion. The social cohesion factors is different per community. In Mitchell's Plain, it will be so much higher than the area of Delft. And I say that for a specific reason. In Mitchell's Plain, a number of residents, since Mitchell's Plain was built, have been living in Mitchell's Plain. The connections, people that grew up together, people that have fostered relationships and that have gone to school together. Many are still in Mitchell's Plain. So we have a greater sense of social cohesion in an area like Mitchell's Plain. And the research has indicated that family members and neighbors will even look after your property if you are not at home. So people will watch out for their neighbor. Someone will watch out for their neighbor's son. And it's different even in pockets of Mitchell's Plain. But when we consider that towards the Delft area, it's vastly different. Because the Delft area has seen an influx of new homeowners and the rise of informal settlements in that particular area. And many of the first homeowners in Delft have since left the area of Delft. So we are looking at how we are building social cohesion in our areas, targeted differently to different areas, because, Chairperson, I'm wanting us as a department to be very specific towards the need of a certain community and to make sure that we play that role in terms of the safety plan, so that we are able to make sure that each and every department that has a role to play in safety, and I want to confirm, each department in our Western Cape government has a role to play towards safety. And that particular role should ultimately help and assist us to build safer communities. With regards to the stockpile, I don't have that particular figure, and I will request that from the South African Police Service as well, the firearms, but I am aware that as a department we have made a number of recommendations with regards to a dedicated firearm destruction site as well. And Chairperson, I would be the first person to relay information to you, because we are at an advanced stage in our negotiations and our discussions with SAPS and with other entities in that regard. Amanda, did I cover or did I miss anything?
MEC, I think you covered everything, but I'll just invite Teresa to talk a little bit more about the rural safety workshops. Oh, and then if I could just answer the question about the Western Cape liquor amendments. So we're busy with the amendments around the minimum unit pricing and standardized trading liquor hours. So that's the approach that Western Cape government is doing, and we're in the process of, we've drafted recommendations around that, and we'll start with public consultations around those in this month and in the next month in order to get public comment before the proposals are submitted to Parliament.
Thank you, members of the Standing Committee. We will report, obviously, in our next BNP report extensively on the rural safety engagements, but just maybe in short, the department has realized that farm watches are much needed in the province. We have learned through these workshops that that greater collaboration, you're asking what that looks like, unite information, because the law enforcement units of the municipalities, the traffic, provincial and local, and the SAPS and the disaster management units have all different sets of data sets, but there's no platform where all of that data sets can be combined so that we can actually have the intel that is required to act upon that. We do understand that SAPS is a very closed organization, and their cash system, they're not going to necessarily share with us, but the others are all willing to cooperate and work together. So the department is looking at a platform that can accommodate all of that. One of the things that I'm just mentioning, a few things that is coming to mind. The department, the rural safety is led by Minister Ivan Meyer, and he set up an interministerial committee where Minister is also serving on. There's also an operational committee for the province on which this Director Becky Similani is sitting on, and all the disaster risk management from all the district municipalities are also serving on that committee. And then the police have got a rural safety national strategy and an 8-point plan, which they are responsible for implementing with our support. And in short, I just wanted to say, for instance, the private security, the farmers have mostly set up their own CCTV cameras, etc. So that you're asking what that collaboration would look like is the province needs to give approval for that provincial roads or whatever roads they are, to give approval for those cameras to be erected. And in turn, they need to give approval for that footage to be used in courts. The drones that the department has helped the West Coast, for instance, with, are used in joint operations when SAPS don't have that technology yet, but is very eager to use it. The law enforcement, we have found, are working not over weekends. They're working from 8 till 4, but most of the crime happens from a Friday to a Sunday. So in some of the rural districts, they have overcome this, which is a long-term issue, but they've overcome it by saying that the new appointees have got a different employment contract, which necessitate them to be able to work over weekends, etc. We have found that SAPS has got like one police member, rural safety officer, for 300 farms in central Karoo, for instance, which basically means no policing for many of those farms. And therefore, this integrated response is so necessary. But you'll hear more about that in the next report. I hope that helps.
Chairperson, and I just forgot one particular question, and I made a note in terms of the vehicles. I am able to confirm that as of 1 November, the entire fleet for the Western Cape was 5894. That was 5894 vehicles in the fleet. For this particular financial year, as of the 1st of November, 363 additional vehicles were ordered, 363 ordered, and as of the 1st of November, only 54 was delivered. We have had engagements with the South African Police Service in that regard, as the 54 is only 14.88% of the actual amount that is ordered, and we are having consistent engagement with the South African Police Service to make sure that all 363 ordered vehicles are actually delivered on or before the 1st of April. Because, Chairperson, we see our role as community safety, but not forgetting that our police oversight should actually be leading to better service delivery, should be leading to making sure that we are able to advocate on behalf of the SAPS in the province, but also make recommendations that will ultimately make our province safer, essentially.
Chairperson, if I may, I forgot to respond to one issue. There was a question around the CCTV cameras reported on page 26. We mentioned 12 police stations. We were just reporting on what the SAPS had reported, that those 12 police stations mentioned had been fitted with CCTV cameras in that year. So it's not the total amount of police stations with CCTV cameras. That would be something else. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those responses. Members, I know you've made lots of notes, and I just want to remind you once again that we will be continuing this discussion at our next meeting on the 7th with the responses to the PNP from the South African Police Service. I'm just going to check if there's a final round of questions. I see Member Pretorius, and then I see Member Kasim. Member Pretorius, you may go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, firstly, I want to commend all the officials who have contributed to the compilation of this report as well as the booklet. I think there's great appreciation for that. Chair, this document is awash with recommendations, and it's important to note that it's called recommendations and not options. And therefore, I wish to ask, and I hope I'm not being difficult, is there budget and is there staff and is there a plan to roll out and implement this? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Member Kasim.
Thank you, Chair. No, mine is just for our next meeting. Is it possible for to have a report basically on the amount of drug dens closed, where and when it was closed, and also who now occupies those specific homes? If we could possibly get that response in or that report in our next meeting, please. Thank you.
Thank you. That's also something we can ask directly through to the South African Police Service. Member Kama.
Thank you very much, Chair. And let me also appreciate the responses that would have been given. Chair, I think following up from the remarks that were made by the MEC, that really with this process of the PNPs, the department also wants to ensure that different entities, law enforcement agencies and government departments play their role. I therefore want to, because I also saw in the initial presentation the issue of reports that are given to the safety cabinet. So one wants to just get an understanding as to whether this cabinet, because the last time I heard about it, I think it might have been 3 years back before COVID. So want to check, does this still sit? Because I'm really interested around the issue of, especially with your local government, creating a conducive environment for policing. And the other question, Chair, that one wants to have is around this LEAP project. I think it's known that as the ANC would been making comments around the claims of the impact of this program, and maybe perhaps it really works. So one wants to get an understanding as to, because what we're hearing now is that they work on a 24-hour shift. The last time I checked, there were just over 1,000. Maybe if we can later get an understanding of how many of these officers are in the on the ground per shift, and whether there are any plans in the department and in government and financially so also to extend the project, and what amount are they looking at, and the issue of whether there's a new recruitment that would happen, and whether there is. I understand this was formed in line with the safety plan, which wanted to focus in the high murder precincts, but get an understanding with the rural engagements that you are having as to, is there a plan to increase the footprint of this program to the province at large, because SAPS and others who are involved in the fight of crime, they also talk about how crime moves, as you close a particular space or focus in a particular area, the activities then move to another area. And we hear of how they are starting to move to the rural parts of the province. That's all. Otherwise, thank you for the responses that would have been given so far. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much. Minister, do you want to respond to those?
Thank you so much, Chairperson, and I appreciate the follow-up questions. Chairperson, I will take it from Member Kama all the way from there. I think in terms of the Western Cape Safety Plan, and the Premier has been very direct in this regard, is that we have taken budget in the Western Cape government from other departments in order to fund the law enforcement advancement program. And the Law Enforcement Advancement Program, commonly known as the LEAP program, is one of the, it's a prong in terms of the safety plan. We currently have 1,308 LEAP members. Those members are deployed across our priority areas. That is where the data is currently showing us where those members should be deployed. We would love, and I think every SAP station would love to have LEAP officers, because the one question I didn't answer earlier on is that each and every station would love to have additional capacity in the form of LEAP officers. We've seen it. We've seen it in Mitchell's Plain. We've seen it in Khayelitsha. And whenever we engage the station commander, the visible policing commander, each and every sector, we often hear amazing sentiments, and our rapid assessment also informed by comments that were made about the integration and how appreciative the SAPS members on the ground is with regards to the interaction with LEAP. To have an area like Delft, for example, Marcelina, how many Delft? 87.
80, Minister.
So
85.
85. An area like Delft that have been plagued by violence. To have an additional 80 members that are there to help and assist you can only strengthen the arm and the hand of the South African Police Service. And that is ultimately what we are wanting to do. So we are working towards what we currently have and in our priority areas. Our data and the evidence that we have suggests and informs the deployment. Because I could, for example, state that, say we have 1,308 members, LEAP officers. If we divide them between 151 stations, what will the average be, Amanda? 1,308 divided, and I know the chairperson is very quick, is 8. So if we had 1,000, chairperson, if we had 1,308 LEAP members in our province, if we divide that between 151, it will be 8 members per precinct. 8 members per precinct that will work within a particular shift, and that shift might dictate that there's only 4 members at any given time. That 4 members in a particular area, if it's a priority areas, I would rather want to ensure that instead of having the 4 members in an area like Sea Point, or an area like Camps Bay, or an area like Rondebosch, and I will take all 8 to Khayelitsha. All 8 to Khayelitsha because we've seen mass murders, we've seen gang violence, and the crime. The data shows us that's our crime priority areas. So we are wanting to be as deliberate and as direct so that these LEAP officers are able to see, so that we can see change in that particular area. I would, yes, because we are not forgetting about our rural areas, chairperson. We have also made funding available to our rural safety units. What that means is that they might not be called LEAP, but there is funding and interventions that we are doing via our district safety plans, which has a component linked to that in terms of the K9 units as well. The K9 units, together with the South African Police Service, over the last 2 days, were doing amazing work. They got 1 set of firearms, and I'm a little upset with SAPS because SAPS didn't initially give credit. It was a joint operation. It was an operation in Malmesbury between SAPS members and the Malmesbury Swartland K9 unit, sponsored by the Department of Community Safety. I have no problem if we are not acknowledged. I have no problem. But that was a joint operation between the K9 unit that this department funds and the South African Police Service in Malmesbury. It was the K9 unit's dogs that sniffed it out because, Chairperson, I'm not really upset with SAPS, but just to give you the understanding, so we have SAPS members and our rural areas also working together. Even though they are not going to be called LEAP in another area, if funding becomes available in the future, we might want to say, what else do we look at in our rural areas? Because the rural areas are also very specific. But those 1,308 members in the current approach will be in the city of Cape Town because that is our hotspot areas. Hotspot is a word I even dislike saying, but it's the priority areas, and that is where we will see the biggest impact. Instead of spreading it across the province in such a thin way, then you see little to no impact in that regard. So we have the rural safety units and the work we do with other municipalities. Member Kasim, I will make sure that as soon as we received information with regards to the drug houses, that is then distributed, because this committee played a vital role in terms of making sure that we are engaging SAPS in that regard, that we are monitoring how many is closed, but we are also looking at further interventions because a number of drug houses is also linked to certain open spaces. That should also be tracked and also be monitored effectively, because in certain areas, drugs are no longer sold from a certain house, but there might be a field opposite. There might be a box opposite the house where it is stashed, for example. So we are looking at all of those activities and how LEAP, Metropolis, and the SAPS is working together in order to close those drug houses. And I think for Member Barnes, the reason why we feel passionate about the rural area is because out of the initial 1,557 known drug houses in our province, 47% was outside of the city of Cape Town. So we are so aware that we cannot neglect what is happening in our rural areas. Is there budget? Very good question. 2020, the midterm budget policy statement, 11.8 billion rand taken from NPA, education and SAPS in order to bail out SAA. So we've seen, and our former finance chairperson will give information with regards to equitable shares, etc., on what we have seen in our province. So there might, in the fiscal national envelope shrinking, it's very difficult. It's very difficult, and that I can concede. It's very difficult to get the ideal number of SAPS members. At station level across our country, the ideal number is 195,000. The ideal, 195. The actual across our country at station level is 105. Okay. That's why I've been saying we are 20 years behind in terms of resourcing. That's at station level across our entire country, not the units, but just at station level. To get there will cost a whole lot of money. What I'm saying is that we are needing to make sure that there's proper management so that the granted amounts, the amounts that are budgeted for, is in the service. That natural attrition, when someone passes away sadly or when someone retires, that there is measures in place to preempt what is happening. I'm able to preempt when certain colleagues in the department will eventually retire. And before that retirement date, you need to put certain measures in place to ensure that there is capacity built upon retirement. So yes, I will concede on the one hand, there might not always be full budget for each and every activity. but there is recommendations that is specifically earmarked and that speaks to management, that speaks to implementing processes and policies that can ultimately make our province safer. Chairperson, baie dankie.
Thank you very much for those responses, Minister. Members, as I mentioned earlier, we will have an opportunity on the 7th to also engage with the South African Police Service and get their feedback on the PNP then. We will hopefully also then have the Minister with us on the 7th as well to also engage further and to make sure that there's tie-in between those. Members, can I ask, are you happy for us to hold over our recommendations until that meeting, because we were doing this as one big discussion? Would that be in order with you? Member Kama?
Chair, yes, I think that's in order. But one recommendation that one would have wanted to make is for the department, because I think it's for the first time that I've seen it, that it is a government position to call for the devolution of policing powers. So as one, if the committee can be briefed, and you and the procedural officer will determine in terms of the program, but the committee be briefed on this concept of devolution of powers, what does it entail, and all those details around it, and the efforts that are made by the department to enhance this call. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, we can schedule that meeting to discuss a new model of policing, as the president has apparently called it. I think it's something very interesting, and it might be something that we need to put on our agenda for when we engage with our colleagues in Gauteng as well, because I listened to the Premier of Gauteng last night. That's certainly the direction they are going in as well. Members, just to check, so you're all happy to roll over, to make notes of your resolutions, and then once we've engaged with the South African Police Service, we will then formulate all those resolutions. Okay, I see a hand in the chamber.
Chair, we were saying we're in agreement.
Okay, silent agreement. Okay, that's perfect. Members, with that, I want to say thank you to the Minister and his team for presenting to us today, and for taking the time at quite great length to go through the PNP recommendations. Members, you have all received a physical copy of the PNP, which was SEAM delivered to your offices on the 16th, and you also have a virtual version of the document. You also have the response from the City of Cape Town as well to the PNP. And what I'd like to suggest is that you take some time to go through some of that, and then when we engage with SAPS, we can then also ask further questions that members would have had more time to engage in the detail of the actual document. So with that, thank you very much for your time, and thank you very much to Wasim and to Mary Ann and to all the technical staff for making this meeting happen. The meeting is thus adjourned. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye.